after the Soviet Union, oil import dropped from 13, 14 million tons a year to only 4.
Cuba in the 80s had 90,000 Russian tractors, factories of pesticides, of chemical fertilizers we received from the Soviet Union. In 1990, everything changed. There was nothing.
When the deep economic crisis began in the early 1990s, it was a change in our lifestyle. We all of a sudden saw abruptly, in a matter of weeks' time, a huge change. We saw symptoms of malnutrition in children under 5 years of age. We saw pregnant women with anemia. We had underweight babies at birth.
The impact on food scarcity was disastrous. The average Cuban lost 20 pounds by 1994.
We were desperate for everything. We don't care about first world quality standards on any commodity. We just need food. It doesn't matter what you bring, we will buy it.
Without imported fuel oil, it was impossible for Cuba to generate the electricity it needed, resulting in blackouts throughout the country.
Well, we had, at that time, power cuts that lasted for many, many hours, maybe up to 14, 16 hours a day. And this, in a climate such as ours, is very difficult because you do need the fridge so the food won't spoil. You had to cook on a daily basis what you had to eat at that moment because you just couldn't put things away. And it was a very difficult moment.
Power cuts were particularly hard in Cuba's large housing complexes. In a tropical climate, with its heat and humidity, it was difficult to be without the use of air conditioners and fans. Without elevators, people used the stairs. Water was carried up or hauled up the outside of the building using a pulley and rope. When taking a bus, people had to wait 3 to 4 hours. When the bus arrived at work, often there was no power. Even if there was power, sometimes there were no spare parts or raw materials. So even if they got to work and had electricity, there was nothing to do. After work, they'd have to wait another 3 to 4 hours for a bus, and often when the bus arrived, it was full and they'd have to wait for another one. The government imported 1.2 million bicycles from China and manufactured 500,000 more.
We had to then learn how to use bicycles, and bicycles was distributed all around the country to try to get to our workplaces. Doctors went to the hospitals, on bikes, without any culture of using bikes. It was just political will, that was it. There's no other way.
In 1992, the United States tightened its embargo on Cuba. Any ship that docked in a Cuban port was denied access to the U.S. for 6 months afterwards. Almost overnight, $750 million worth of food and medical supplies to Cuba were halted. A few years later, the embargo was intensified, and foreign businesses working in Cuba were barred from entering the U.S. Cuba's access to foreign capital was crippled.
In the case of Cuba, you try to suffocate a country. You deprive the country of access to financial sources, so Cuba cannot have access to the World Bank or to the IMF for good.
An American dollar reached 150 pesos. And the average salary is like 2 pesos. No? There were people that were making $2 a month. So money was not useful to get stuff. So we end up being like an experiment, no? Like with controlled conditions. Like nothing or very little things can get from the outside, so everything has to happen from the inside.
During the first 5 years of the special period, government food rations kept the crisis at bay. These food distributions guaranteed a minimum level of food to each of Cuba's citizens.
And it was invented when we lost diplomatic relations with the U.S., no more economic relations with the U.S., and in order to prevent hoarding. Okay, so the more people that had more money would just swipe, do away with everything on the counters, and others would go hungry. They invented this ration food distribution system.
With food imports reduced by 80%, the government-supplied food distributions had to be cut drastically.
You have the official state market through subsidies, ration card, which has been shrink to perhaps 1/5 of consumption, from almost 100%.
Now, let's go to this board because I want to show you so you can understand. This is on a monthly basis.
any one of the Cuban population has granted through this system 3 of 4 weeks of basic consumption according to United Nations minimum level of calories ingestion in a month. To complete the 4 weeks basic level, it could come in the form of subsidized food on your workplace, lower prices, so you pay meals at subsidized prices. So that allows you to pay only weekends or nights meals.
So there might be a week, okay, that you might have to buy extra, purchase extra. It depends also on your consuming habits.
Every aspect of Cuban life was affected by the special period, but no change was as far-reaching as agriculture. Cuba had committed to the Green Revolution, a system which requires the massive use of fossil fuels in the form of natural gas-based fertilizers, oil-based pesticides, and diesel fuel for tractors and other farm machinery. The country's agriculture was more industrialized than any other Latin American country, and exceeded the U.S. in its use of fertilizer.
The Cuban agricultural conventional Green Revolution system never was able to feed the people. It had high yields, but it was not oriented to the plantation agriculture, open economy. We export citrus, tobacco, sugarcane, and we import the basic things, 55% of the rice, more than 50% of the vegetable oil, of the oil and the lard that we consume. So the system, even in the good times, how people here remember, never fulfill the basic needs.
Cuba's agriculture began to falter as one problem after another halted production. Fuel and parts for tractors were almost impossible to find. Seeds, tools, animal feed, and vaccines were scarce.
Esto trajo como consecuencia que el de estar aquí era prácticamente una agricultura de supervivencia. Y los insumos que había de químicos ya no existían. Por ello que se dejó de la harina de trigo, los fertilizantes, los granos, el aceite. Fue un golpe muy fuerte. Y muchas personas pensaban que el proceso podía colapsar en 3 meses o 6 meses. Y realmente fue una etapa muy difícil para readaptar la economía a las nuevas condiciones.
The lack of fuel drove us to have a very big shortage of food.
So people, they end up squatting places in the city and growing food there. Without knowing how, because there were engineers, there were doctors, there was not farmers.
A drastic effort to convert every piece of arable land to organic agriculture was begun. During the special period, Cuba was able to help prevent famine through an urban agricultural movement.
Every vacant lot in the city was turned into orchard.
At first, urban gardening was an ad hoc local survival response to the crisis.
They needed food, they didn't know how, and they just did it, trial and error. And there was a space, they have a problem with garbage, dumping, rats, so they fixed all of those problems, get rid of the garbage and start growing things there.
Another thing during the special period was the identification of idle plots of land, right, that were cleaned up by the community and turned into agricultural gardens, urban agricultural gardens.
Hearing of the crisis, Australian permaculture experts came to Cuba to assist in developing new ways to garden and raise food.
So in October of 1993, the first 2 Australians came. And so we started to design the rooftop garden in that place. And after that, we got this small project. For us, it was a lot of money, $26,000 American dollars. And we started